Welcome to the Crocheted Caution Tape, where we discuss true crime, mysteries, spookies, and dark history. I am Erica, and come with me as we dive into a little bit of dark history today. It is very dark, but this is a story that I have researched since I was in high school. We are not going to discuss how long ago that was, but I do need a list of trigger warning. This is warming? Okay. A trigger warning. This story is very brutal and very graphic. So, if you are triggered by a lot of blood, a lot of brutality, just horrific things, feel free to skip this video. But today we are going to discuss Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess. Let's dive in. Elizabeth Bathory was born Elizabeth Bathory, born on August 7th in 1560. She was born into Protestant nobility in Hungary. Her family controlled Transylvania. Her uncle was the King of Poland, Stefan. She was raised at her family castle in Esked, Hungary. I'm probably butchering that. She would later marry Count Ferenc Nadasdy in 1575. She moved to the castle Chatis, a wedding present from the Nadasdy family. 1585 to 1595, she had 4 children. She was educated, which was unusual for a woman to be educated at the time. She knew how to speak Latin, German, Hungarian, and Greek. She was a very smart woman. As in with a lot of royal and nobility back in the day, her parents were first cousins. That could contribute to her form of thinking. She was epileptic and had violent seizures. She was exposed to horrific events throughout her childhood. She saw a man sewn to the body of a horse for stealing, severe beatings of servants. She was drawn to the violence. She didn't hide away from it. She wanted to see it. She wanted to witness all of the violence. She was a very graphic girl. Very smart, but very graphic. At the age of 10, she became engaged to the 15-year-old Ferenc Nadasdy. As a custom, she moved in with his parents in their palace. Moved in with his parents in their palace to get educated on how to run the estate that her future mother-in-law currently controlled. There was a rumor that she had an affair in her early teens with a peasant boy. With this affair, she got pregnant and had a child in secret. She gave the child away. Ferenc supposedly found out and he had the boy castrated and thrown into the thrown to the dogs. Castrated, thrown to the dogs. We don't want you. Elizabeth and friends married on May 8th, 1574. She was only 14. 4,500 people attended their wedding. They had maybe 50 people. 4,500 people. Nobility in the 16th century. Okay. It was a 3-day party. Their wedding was 3 days long. Friends gifted her with her own castle, the Castle Chatis, and Little Carpathians, one of the darkest castles of Hungary. Would we expect anything for our dear, sweet Elizabeth? The marriage united two of the most powerful families together. Let's talk about the first years of Elizabeth and Florence's marriage. Elizabeth continued to learn about and overseeing the estates she controlled. Ongoing. She was very smart. She was continuously learning. Florence was fighting against the Ottomans, and he was a great warrior. He was nicknamed the Black Knight of Hungary. He was extremely brutal. His extreme brutality against the enemy terrified his enemies and shocked his allies. It was that bad. The Turks invaded Hungary in 1591. It was later known as the Long War. It lasted between 1593 and 1606. Of course, Florence was there fighting. He was the Black Knight of Hungary. Of course he was going to be there. But the Hungarian economy did not fare well during the war. But did Elizabeth feel the strain of the economy? No, she was nobility in her own palace, the Castle Chatis. Florence was always bringing home gifts from the Ottoman Empire. He fought somebody, he looted. Or what they did. So he was always bringing home gifts from the Ottoman Empire. Elizabeth and Florence were so wealthy. They lent money to the Hungarian Habsburg Empire to keep it afloat. Elizabeth and Florence is the reason why the Hungarian Empire stayed active during the war. While Florence was out fighting the war, Elizabeth defended the castle from the Turks. With all the fighting, Elizabeth and Florence spent very little time together. But when they did, they bonded over their love of violence. They tortured the servants' girls. Florence even showed Elizabeth new torture methods that she had not seen before, such as rolling up oiled papers and sticking them between the toes of the servant girls and lighting it on fire. It's not funny. It's not funny. I'm just awkward. He gave her a clawed glove to scratch the faces of the disobedient servant girls. love for violence, married, new torture tactics. As if Ferenc was not bad enough of an influence, enter Anna Darvolio in 1601. Now, Anna was rumored to be a witch. Fairly sure she was. Ferenc taught her how to torture. Ferenc taught Elizabeth how to torture, where Darvolia taught her how to kill. Elizabeth just became more and more sadistic. After Darvolia moved in, Elizabeth killed several of her servants. No questions were asked about the disappearances. If the families did question them, they were silenced. The questions were squashed by the power of the Bathory dynasty. In other words, Elizabeth was untouchable. She could torture and kill all she wanted. That did not stop the rumors, though. Local pastors were often called to the castle all the time to perform the funeral rites of servant girls who were died of cholera. All of your servant girls are dying of cholera weekly. Elizabeth and Ferenc had 4 to 5 children. Not much is known about the children. In around 1601, Ferenc became sick. The illness led to paralysis of the legs. 1601 is when Darvolia moved in. Little sus there. Ferenc lived with the paralysis and the sickness for 3 years, and he didn't die until 1604. But whenever Ferenc did die, Elizabeth's hobby of torture turned into a full-time occupation. She would not stop killing her servants because she would then have to spend time replacing them. So she was like, I keep killing my servants and I keep having to replace them. It's a lot of work. So to stop killing her servants, she began luring girls from local villages under the pretense of going to a finishing school. A girl could start getting tortured for something as small as missing a stitch. They missed a stitch. This could result in them being stabbed in the fingers with long sewing needles. If the servant pulled out the needle in front of Elizabeth, she would cut the finger off for missing a stitch. How often do I mess up stitches while I'm talking with you guys? Oh my god, I wouldn't have any fingers. The torture chamber. Elizabeth spent a lot of time in her torture chamber, where she had, as the name implies, very many torture tactics. There were pincers to rip girls' flesh, insides torn out. Possibly even cannibalism were forced on some. At least in one situation, Elizabeth bit a chunk of flesh from a girl. Elizabeth, there were rumors that still go on. We're not entirely sure if they're true or not, but Elizabeth is most known for draining the blood of virgins to bathe in them. One day she didn't accidentally. She was getting her hair brushed by one of her servants. Her servants caught a tangle and accidentally pulled Elizabeth's hair, to which Elizabeth, whose hand was always adorned in big rings, backhanded the servant girl, and with the rings cut her. Elizabeth got some of her blood on her hand. As she smeared it in, she saw in her eyes that the blood youthened her skin, made her skin look very young. So she thought she had found the secret to youth. So she would drain the girls' bloods and bathe in them, sometimes even drinking. We know of one instance where she bit a chunk out of a girl. All of this is because she wanted to remain youthful. These rumors started after her death, whenever her torture chamber and everything were discovered. Due to these rumors, Bram Stoker was said to have been inspired by Elizabeth and Vlad the Impaler when writing Dracula. We all know that Bram Stoker was inspired by Vlad the Impaler with Dracula, but not many people know that Elizabeth Bathory also played a role in his characterization of Dracula. It's also said that we know that Elizabeth was related to many nobilities across the empires. It is said that Elizabeth and Vlad were cousins. So violence just runs in the family. Darvulia died of a stroke in 1609. After this, Elizabeth, for some reason, decided she needed a higher class of victims. She could have just been running out of the peasant girls that she was inviting for the finishing school. So she started a higher finishing school for noble girls. And she would lure them in from neighboring villages. Their families would pay, not crocheting much during this, I'm sorry. Their families would pay to send their daughters to school. This was her downfall. Not many people pay attention to missing peasant girls back then. But if missing nobility, that was big. Yeah. Can't be losing the bloodlines of the nobility. But the noble girls were disappearing after being sent to Elizabeth. Elizabeth would make up stories of one of the girls going crazy and killing the others and then killing herself. No one believed this, of course. The parents went to King Matthias II. King Matthias started an investigation. He had his closest representative, Georgi Thorzo, led the investigation. Some even think that Thorzo was Elizabeth's cousin. He was very close with Ferenz. He was Ferenz's best friend. Ferenz even requested Thorzo to watch after Elizabeth while he was on his deathbed. Either way, cousins with Elizabeth, best friends of friends, Thurza was way more loyal to the king than family or friendship. The investigation. Thurza interviewed more than 300 witnesses. They would talk of blood-drenched walls, hearing screams, and the growing cemetery on the castle grounds. You're going to kill the kids and then you're going to bury them on your own ground? And call the pastors and preachers of the community to give the funeral rites weekly. Many of the witnesses that Thurzo had interviewed were servants who had somehow escaped the castle. With Elizabeth being a countess and the history with Thurzo and the family and friends, and Thurzo reached out to Elizabeth's family for advice. He was convinced of her guilt, but also had his promise to friends. A secret agreement was decided on. Thurzo was able to finish his investigation, but it would never go to trial. So there would never be the public humiliation of the family. Elizabeth would go directly to prison, and no public embarrassment would be made. No one in Elizabeth's family fought for her innocence. They all knew she was crazy. Woman be smart, but she'd be crazy. In December of 1610, Thurzo wanted to make sure he had enough evidence against Elizabeth. So he and King Matthias dined with Elizabeth at Castle Chechis. When they took their first bite of the dessert, instantly both fell sick. First bite, instant. They ran from the castle, thinking Elizabeth was poisoning them, which is very much likely. She knew there was an investigation on him. Of course she was trying to poison them. New Year's Eve, 1610. Thurzo and armed guards hid outside of the castle. They waited patiently for Elizabeth and Erzy Margarova, who is believed to also be a witch, who Elizabeth replaced Darvulia with as her confidant. They came outside to cast a protective spell for Elizabeth and bring the death of Thorzo. So a protection spell with a hex. I'm not sure how that would work. You give out to the world, you get what you give out times 3. Which I guess, doesn't matter because of all the torture that she has done, but, it doesn't seem like a protection and a hex should go together, but to each their own. After they went inside, Thurzo and his men went to the castle. 2 more bodies were found as they entered the door. They were found right inside the door. They found it. There was a mutilated body of a girl near the outside of the door, and then when they go in, there's 2 more bodies. There were screams. So Thurzo and his men, they followed the screams to the torture chamber, where Elizabeth was found and put into her own dungeon. No one is 100% sure on how many deaths were caused by Elizabeth. The count ranges from 80 to 650. There's told to be logs of 650 women girls' names and dates, but that's all. It was just names and dates. So I'm not sure if that was her torture kill list or if that was servant list. Most think it was the death list. In January of 1611, the closest accomplices were put on trial and sentenced to death. But before death, they were subjected to their own forms of torture. See? I would have had my fingers stabbed. Their fingers were torn off by iron tongs. They were put to death and then tossed onto a bonfire. That's less torture than what they gave out. Now, as per the secret decision and agreement, Elizabeth was not put on trial, but she was confined in one of her torture dungeons, in her tower. She was confined to a tower. The only visitors that Elizabeth had were priests and Thurzo. On August 21st, 1614, Elizabeth complained of her hands being cold. My hands are always cold, but she was complaining of her hands being cold. The guard told her to just try to go get some sleep. So she did. And she never woke up. Originally, Elizabeth was buried in the Castle Church Cemetery. But this caused the villagers to go into an uproar. They knew what she did. They did not want the murderer of their daughters to be buried near their daughters. So it is said that she was exhumed and then taken to her hometown, Esked, and she was buried in a family crypt. However, the crypt has been discovered and searched, and Elizabeth's body is missing. Her body cannot be found. Elizabeth was brutal, bloodthirsty, literally, and just was drawn to violence from a very young age. She was surrounded by it. She grew up with it with her family, and then she married into even more violence, and then her best friend and confidant showed her even more tactics. She surrounded herself with it. She enjoyed it. She did it all because she thought that it would keep her young forever. A little drastic. And that, my friends, is the story of Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess of Hungary. If you like this story, please hit subscribe, like the video, and share with your friends. Hit that little bell for notifications whenever I have a new story out. It is peak season at my work, so I'm going to try, but working 6 days a week is going to be very difficult for me to get more videos out until the new year. I know I haven't been on a set schedule, but I have plans. I do. After the new year, I'm going to be on it. Please feel free to comment your ideas. I will respond to them, and I will add them to my list. So, goodbye, my spooky friends. Have a great night. Bye-bye.